So I'd like to welcome everyone to this very special Zoom presentation by Mark Mawrence, The Spiritual Essence of Politics. My name is Dennis Bartok. I'm the Executive Director for the Philosophical Research Society in Los Angeles. And we are very honored to have Mark joining us. He is a partner in DMG Global, a strategic communications and marketing consultancy, where he has successfully served corporations, governments, and political candidates. His work has focused on predicting future trends in business, politics, and communications, sales, and marketing strategies, as well as on issues relating to socially responsible corporate practices. Following one of the guiding principles for his life's work, bridging the gap between the spiritual and material world, he has organized and directed numerous international conferences, established successful sales and marketing organizations in a wide range of businesses, innovated new models for corporate practices, and worked with numerous charitable nonprofit organizations, including the Philosophical Research Society, where Mark has been a tremendous support with a number of our recent publications and initiatives. He was, in fact, a key player in allowing us to open the beautiful PRS library on Thursdays for public research and study. So will you please join me in welcoming Mark Mawrence?
Thank you, Dennis, and thanks everyone for participating. Tonight, and welcome to the talk. Tonight, we'll be looking into the spiritual essence of politics. We're going to take a brief journey into the foundational principles of what it means to be human and how two integral doctrines that touch our lives, spirituality and politics, are not, as so many often assume, mutually exclusive. In fact, as we'll see tonight in the talk, many of the most significant political developments in history were directly inspired by spirituality. I've always maintained, as have many, many others, that a more conscious and concerted effort to recognize this and encourage a more enlightened approach to the political process can and will help resolve a lot of the issues that we confront today as a species in threat. So, a second here. There's no doubt that civilization, that humanity right now is on the brink of something very dramatic. Will it be cataclysmic, brought on by climate change? God forbid, a nuclear winter? Social collapse as the notorious Black Mirror drives us all off a cliff? Or will we see a new age of technological advancement as we finally ponder our miracle of life on Earth? Will we emerge as an integrated global community, recognizing that we have mutual interests that are going to trump any threat that could eventually snuff out life on Earth? That's the hope. So this question that we're looking into tonight lies at the heart of many debates about our tenure, our evolution into an upright hominid species that emerged from primal forests and savannas. As we created civilization, created more and more advanced tools, and eventually reached for the stars. Here's the fundamental question that's kind of driving our discussion tonight. Are we inherently good, driven by altruistic motives, or are we selfish, fearful, and compelled to survive at all costs, regardless of consequences to others? What is human nature, and why have some of the most consequential social and political achievements in our history been conceived and inspired by deeply held spiritual principles? It's my belief that there's an evolutionary imperative for all of us to reflect on this history that we're going to be reviewing tonight, so often ignored or buried, and we need to all collectively help usher in a new kind of politics, one that's lacking in today's hyper-partisan, deeply divided civic discourse. All you need to do is turn on the news, which a lot of us don't want to do anymore because of what's going on in politics today. So the altruistic view of human nature, there's lots of scientific studies, tons of them over decades, that validate that humans are altruistic. That's a broad and deep study. The thesis here is simple, that cooperation trumps conflict. whether it's a deterministic, hardwired biological basis for this, or simply a response to real world conditions that dictate survival. And as is usually the case, it's probably a little bit of both. There's a lot of evidence that supports that. E.O. Wilson, as just a preeminent legendary biologist, sees humanity bringing us together, that there's a moral obligation to preserve and protect humankind. As we'll see later, he's presented something that could be an answer to our survival. It's quite fascinating. That'll be in our last section of our talk. Many, many studies, one of the most notable, the interdependence hypothesis in 2016 by social scientists, demonstrated that as humanity became more and more interdependent and collaborative, we became more altruistic, more caring as a natural evolution. And to survive, we had to rely on others. This came out yesterday. It's amazing. A study in Science magazine was just published actually last week. This is in Scientific American and also Science magazine, where they claimed scientifically there was a study that there was a bottleneck in the human population chain, one that was so extreme that our ancestors were down to 1,280 breeding individuals 930,000 years ago. Imagine that. Almost wiping out the human population. So everybody on this call and all 7 billion people on the planet today owe our existence to these 1,280 people. And I'd like to ask a question. Do you think that we're here because those 1,280 people joined hands and figured out a way to collaborate and become codependent on one another? Or do you think that they fought each other over who is going to get that grain of sand, grain of food, or that rabbit that was killed? So it's just kind of making the point, I hope. So at some point, humans created a way of life where collaborating with others was necessary for our survival and procreation. And this ultimately bred in altruism. It's hardwired, I believe, into who we are. We naturally want to help one another. So evolutionary psychologists have hypothesized that this altruism most likely evolved in a way for humanity to prosper. Cooperation and being kind, giving a distinct edge to those that choose altruism. So let's look at the other point of view, the selfish view of human nature. Here's Nemo with a selfie. Lots of social scientists out there that disagree, saying looking out for number one is the only means by which survival was ensured by our species. How could a hairy savage somehow evolved into a benevolent, caring member of society? That's nonsense, they say. We were driven by other instincts, and that's not altruism. Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations, 1776, a seminal book that helped define modern capitalism, said it's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their advantages. Nicholas Mooney wrote a best-selling book called The Selfish Ape. That's quite a daunting image there. Our Path to Extinction, where he explores the future of humanity, and to put it bluntly, he doesn't think there is one. That's, again, another view of where we're going. It's All About Me, Cody Moser, another very important book, The Selfish Nature of Human Cooperation. The harsh reality is man is a selfish biological creature geared with a Machiavellian intelligence and an urge to win. So what is our nature? We've looked at kind of both possibilities now, the altruistic, the selfish. Do we have any guidance from the present and the past that can help give us some answers? Well, we have in the present term the concepts of string theory, of quantum mechanics, holographic principles. I'm sure that everyone on this call has probably heard or experienced the notion that molecules within our being resonate with stars far away, with salmon that swim and every heart that beats. There's a connectivity that is now scientifically validated, which is incredible. Rudolf Steiner, far before these scientific principles were revealed, said you can get an idea of human nature only when you can see the relationship of the individual being to the entire cosmos. So let's look back at Greek mythology and the rape and abduction of Persephone, the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, by Hades. It's a foundation for one of the most consequential rituals in the history of humanity, inspiring some of the greatest minds that have ever lived. And I wish I could see a class right now. Sorry, I'm not there present with everyone. I'd love to see a show of hands of how many people have heard of the Eleusinian mysteries. Demeter wandered in grief for 9 days, coming ultimately to Eleusis, a town just outside of Athens. And Zeus intervened and said, we can't have this. Demeter has ended plant life. The harvest has ended because her daughter was raped and savaged by Hades. So we've got to release her. So every spring, life burst forth anew when Persephone was released. And in honor of that event and those two goddesses, one of the most sacred of all mysteries in the ancient Greek religion through all centuries, for thousands of years, actually until the fall of paganism, was the Eleusinian mysteries. 2,000 years, this event was reenacted by thousands of Athenians who made a 9-day pilgrimage to Eleusis to partake in rituals to reenact this. And they were sworn to secrecy under penalty of death. There's been some speculation there were hallucinogenic drinks, mystical rituals. Things happened that allowed those that experienced the event to elevate their lives above the human sphere into the divine and to assure their redemption by making them a god, so conferring immortality upon them. This was foundational not only for all of Greek philosophy and the origins of democracy, but for Western civilization itself. Eleusis was really our first spiritual capital on planet Earth. Who participated? Plato, Aristotle, Euripides, Sophocles, Pindaros, the poet, Marcus Aurelius. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Were all permanently transformed by what they experienced at Eleusis. Cicero took part, and he wrote this: among the many exceptional and divine things your Athens has produced and contributed to human life, nothing is better than the Eleusinian mysteries. For by means of them, we have been transformed from a rough and savage way of life to the state of humanity, and have been civilized, just as they are called initiations. So in actual fact, we have learned from them the fundamentals of life and have grasped the basis not only for living with joy, but for dying with a better hope. It's an amazing, amazing thing. And again, largely unknown. One of the many things that we'll talk about tonight that just are not taught in any of our educational institutions and by any of our historians. So we've heard of the Essenes, the Dead Sea Scrolls, when they were discovered, obviously put a spotlight on this very, very magical, secretive sect that lived in sacred solitude. They practiced sacred teachings from many disciplines and forbid any teaching to the uninitiated, the unprepared. They participated in humanitarian acts. They believed without their teachings, humanity would sink into darkness and unspeakable atrocities. Steiner again spoke, when directing our gaze into the vastness of space, it's divinity that fills it, divinity which must be united with the earth seed. If the human soul looks deeply enough into itself, it finds within itself the stage where gods are accomplishing their deeds and man himself is taking part of them. Well, on to St. Augustine, one of the preeminent founders of the Catholic Church, who believed, well, no, humans are sinful. Nothing will save us. Our salvation is only dependent on God's grace. The philosopher Thomas Hobbes in the 17th century argued that humans, again, are selfish, only caring about wealth and power, fame, food, clothing, and his very, very famous phrase that life was only nasty, brutish, and short for most. Then again, the other point of view, Rousseau and Locke, famous for their belief in the goodness of human nature, believing that people are equal. The only admirable government was one formed by the society itself, direct democracy. That Locke's views are reflected in everything that created modern political government structure and democracy itself. So assumptions about human nature drive policies on economics, law, crime, affects our values, what we believe can reasonably strive for as individuals and as a society. Rival theories of human nature, which we've just been looking at, are entwined in different ways of life, different political systems, and this sure makes sense. This is from Steven Pinker, The Blank Slate, another great book. These have been the source of much conflict over the course of history and, of course, today. So what if we could reimagine these assumptions? Plato did say politics is the art of the possible, and I'd say that's the subtext for everything that we're talking about tonight. Let's talk now about the emergence of religion and the age of the goddess. Giordano Bruno was one of the most profound philosophers in history. Again, someone not taught in most history classes. He advocated philosophical theories that blended mystical Neoplatonism, pantheism. He believed the universe was infinite. He also actually spoke about extraterrestrial life, spoke about how God is the soul of the universal world, that material things are manifestations of one infinite principle. He was burned at the stake as a heretic on February 17th, 1600, very dark day. But he did say something that caught my eye, and is, to me, the favorite quote that I've drawn from Bruno: an homage to the goddess. I'm displeased with the bulk of mankind, and am enamored with one particular lady. 'Tis for her that I am free in servitude, content in pain, rich in necessity, and alive in death. 'Tis for the love of true wisdom, and by the studious admiration of this mistress, that I fatigue, that I disquiet, that I torment myself. Well, you have to believe in something. And we do have religious instincts. Humans do search for something greater. How do we evolve? How do we change ourselves? There was a time way back in the dim recesses of history where humans became aware of the gap between themselves and the world. Well, here I am, and the world is out there, and what's the connection? How do we know? It was confusing. It was chaotic. That's when the shaman took over. Trance, shamanistic experiences, the pursuit of ecstasy-laden experiences helped ease the pain. The shaman guided us. They helped bridge the gap between ourselves and the world. Carl Jung, who, by the way, I'm sure many on this call have studied Jung. The one thing that I find fascinating about Carl Jung is that he had quotes that literally are manifestations of vast tracts of knowledge in a mere sentence. Man must come into a relationship with his unconscious, into the mythic world in which we were once at home by right of birth. Mazatec shaman Maria Sabina, credible woman, said, there's a world beyond ours, a world that is far away, nearby, and invisible. There is where God lies, where the dead live, where spirits and the saints, a world where everyone has already happened and everything is known. That world talks. It has a language of its own. I report what it says. I've done a lot of work with corporate organizations, with companies, with CEOs, with boards of directors. It was fascinating. About 20 years ago, there was a study done where Fortune 100 corporation CEOs were asked, what would you like to see at your next corporate retreat? You know, where they conspire on how to malign the world with more products, or hopefully to give us good stuff. But when asked, 92% of them said they'd like a shaman to attend the retreat. That's quite fascinating. Even people in that stage and that stature of life understand that there's something that needs to be translated from the unknown to the known. Thomas Hill wrote a great book, Masters of Reality. Shamanism is a form of exploratory divination, effective social organizer. Shamans make lucid the mental associations that lurk quietly underneath our understanding of reality. They help make explicit a part of our mind that is thousands, if not millions of years old. Then somebody way back in time noticed that when they accidentally stuck a seed in the ground and it grew, and they came back around a few months later, there were more seeds. Oh my goodness. Agriculture. Let's grow the food instead of wandering around trying to find it. That was when grains turned nomads into farmers. And then we saw the city-state arise. We had to protect our stuff. We had to protect ourselves from other folks running around trying to steal our stuff. And the city-state rose up. Then what happened? Tribal societies were held together by the will and vision of shaman, most notably. Those societies became more structured. Nomadic wandering was replaced by agriculture, organized society, and the shaman was replaced by priests. And this direct venture into the world of spirit by the shaman as a conduit and translator for people, the transcendent experience was displaced by myths, gods, and ultimately organized religion. You know, the great gods in the sky would tell you what to do, and you better listen. So the shaman, they served people directly. The priests, unfortunately, and here we go with human nature, what part of their nature began to serve themselves, gathering power as priests and kings, and ultimately paving the way to monarchies. That's how monarchies were created. The strongest guy that found the strongest priest that had the great amount of power said, okay, I'll be king. I'll rule everything. Okay, let's go. Again, Carl Jung, one of the main functions of organized religion is to protect people against a direct experience of God. Well, what if I told you there is always another way? Thank you, Morpheus. Goddess worship goes back to Paleolithic times. It's clear with so much evidence that gods were actually feminine. Feminine archetypes permeated every aspect of society. As humanity searched for meaning, it was the divine feminine that rose up. That was the fabric that bound together so much of culture, life-giving, nurturing, and wise, the goddess. Throughout eons of history, the goddess assumed many roles, many faces. Always she represented nature, the sun, the moon, the earth, the sky. The goddess religion in all forms is a nature religion at base. Goddess worship, to worship the goddess meant to worship and be connected to nature. The most famous depiction of the goddess is Venus of Willendorf, 35,000 years old, Paleolithic period, the time when no one found images of men. It was always archaeologists are finding the goddess. The goddesses were the figurines that were found, indicating that, well, the women in Stone Age society were ascendant. They had the highest place. The one society that really confirmed this and has been studied for decades, for a long time, is Minoa, a Bronze Age civilization, 3000 BC. And many experts contend this graceful, refined, peaceful society was matrilineal. They had great architecture. Their whole society was based on love of nature, peace, encapsulated by goddess statues everywhere. Extensive evidence that women played the dominant role in Minoan society. Conversely, when you look at patriarchal societies, male-dominated societies, what you find are ramparts, large temples to the gods, conquest, warfare, funeral edifices, indications in art and public facilities that hierarchy dominated by male kings and subservient monks and priests. That's patriarchy. None of those images, none of that was found in Minoa. There was no legacy of that. It was only a legacy of mother goddess worship and the ascendance of women to power and authority, elegance, refinement, exquisite art. And archaeologists remain amazed at the fact there were no signs of warfare during that remarkable period so long ago. Then it all ended. Whether it's the warring hordes from the steppes, there's a lot of theories about what happened. Could have been volcanic eruptions, the end of Atlantean civilization. There's a lot of speculation about the connection between Atlantis and Minoa. But matriarchal societies that worship goddesses were replaced. It was Ishtar, Isis, Demeter, Artemis gave way to Zeus and Gilgamesh, Amun-Ra, Yahweh, and Apollo. Male gods are the ones that took over. Joseph Campbell wrote in the older mother myths and writes, the light and darker aspects of mixed thing that is life had been honored equally and together, male, female, yin and yang, if you will. Whereas in the latter male-oriented patriarchal myths, all that is good and noble was attributed to new heroic master of gods, leaving to the native nature powers the character only of darkness, to which also a negative moral judgment was now added. So legends during this time of transition recount time and time again how heroic men stole power from angry, vengeful women. And guess what appeared during this age? The crone, the bloodthirsty witch, the evil hag of the forest. This was a brilliant, in my company, we do a lot of branding. That's what one of the things we're known for. This was a great branding initiative. Joseph Campbell nailed it. He termed this mythological defamation. We defamed the goddess. Feminine principles were diminished, and the ascendant male god warrior hero came to the front of the line, and the gentle theories of the goddess worship and the elementals and the fairies and the subtle aspects of nature and all the things that were the filaments that tied together the mystical elements of life retreated, vanished into the mist, fully aghast at the turn of events on Earth. So will she return? Where does that leave us? Is this dream of a peaceful, matriarchal, nature-loving, art-enhanced society, is that even attainable? Is it a utopian vision? Is it just silly, foolish speculation that it never even existed? A lot of historians and sociologists and archaeologists say, "Oh, it's all a myth. That's just, your own rebranding." Is that a utopian, naive fantasy, or could it be possible to shape a society in this fashion? Do we have the tools to even do so? Well, let's look at a period of history where something quite remarkable did happen, the Renaissance, when spirituality infused into body politic actually saved the world. Before the Renaissance actually took hold in Europe, Europe was gripped by violent struggles between light and darkness, and that's why they literally called it the Dark Ages. But there were movements, many of them led by enlightened men and women who were elevated to the highest principles of the human experience. Two of these movements we'll look at very briefly, the Cathars and the Knights Templar, resonate through time and history. The Cathars, their stronghold was in the southwestern portion of France into Spain and Andorra. They believed that evil dominated the world, and actually they believed that they were the real Christians, and they thought the Catholic Church was the church of Satan, quite candidly. In response, the church organized the very first Inquisition. The first crusade was not against Muslims or Jews or infidels, it was against Christians, against Cathars, to exterminate this heresy, which became the first European genocide. Cadite eos novid enim dominis qui sunt eius. This Latin phrase was spoken by the commander of the Albigensian Crusade before the massacre at Belziers on July 22nd, 1209. It was a direct order to go in and kill everybody. The direct translation from this general who commanded it was, "Kill them all. The Lord knows those that are his own." The theory being, well, if they're true Christians and we kill them, then when they ascend to see God, he'll say, okay, come on in, you're fine. But if they were infidels, then you deserve to die. That was the first crusade. The Knights Templar had a very different fate. They actually helped rule most of Europe for 2 centuries, virtually. The warrior monks, established in France in 1119, a fighting force with great wealth and power. But they, as many of us, I'm sure, understand and know and have studied and practiced esoteric beliefs from gnostic practices. They revered the divine feminine, the goddess, Christian mysticism, and they embraced Hermetic theosophy. And unlike the Cathars, they had great power and authority until ultimately the Catholic Church and the King of France in 1307 decided, well, nope. And Jacques de Molay, on October 13th, 1307, was burnt at the stake. That's the origins of that date, which I'm sure many of us have learned. They were too much of a threat to be tolerated. Manly in the Orders, the Quest talks about this legacy of truth. Secret tradition, spiritual communion by these artisans constituted an esoteric fraternity. The Crusade scattered the masters of the sect over an entire continent, the perfect ones, wandering around Europe in various disguises as troubadours, peddlers, merchants, and journeymen. They established guilds, champions of the human cause, as guild masters. They legislated the life of the times, planting the seeds of the democratic dream. Marcello Ficino, if you haven't studied him, I highly recommend you look into who this man was. He was the high priest of the Renaissance. He said, the intellect is prompted by nature, and we have nature again, to comprehend the whole breadth of being under the concept of truth it knows all, and under the concept of good it desires all. Ficino was an Italian scholar and Catholic priest who probably was the most influential humanist philosopher of all time, of the Renaissance. He was the first scholar who translated all of Plato's works, and he synthesized Christianity and Platonism. He created an entirely new worldview that would become the foundation of the Renaissance. Historians refer to Ficino as the Renaissance was Ficino's child. Cosimo de' Medici, if you just ignore any political overlay here, but if you could take David Koch, Elon Musk, and George Soros and combine them into one person in terms of power, authority, and influence, that would be Cosimo de' Medici, who was the head of the Medici banking family that was the most dominant banking political force in Europe for quite a while. He basically underwrote the Renaissance and appointed Ficino as the head of the Florentine Academy. And the whole purpose of the Academy was chartered on the task of creating a new roadmap for humanity, inspired by mystical teachings, deeply spiritual principles. And Ficino's ultimate inspiration was to unify all philosophies. The grand vision became more and more real and tangible when he translated Corpus Hermeticum, written by none other than the legendary Hermes Trismegistus, which I'm sure we all know. This text that he wrote sparked an interest in astronomy, astrology, alchemy, all kinds of theologies. The translation of Hermetica, 1471, was a thunderbolt throughout all of Europe. Occult philosophy spread, inspiring mystics and writers, theologians, painters. The Renaissance was now in full bloom. Hermeticism influenced virtually every aspect of society. Steiner wrote about Hermes. Hence, we must regard Hermes, the great wise one, who, according to Egyptian tradition, lived upon the earth in the dawn of antiquity and was endowed with the most profound clairvoyant insight concerning man's relation to the universe, as having possessed a high degree of the power of apprehending and explaining the true nature of the connection between the constellations and the forces of the spirit world, and of interpreting the signs portraying events and happening as expressed in the language of the stars in terms of their mysterious interrelations. Florence Ficino's time, it was Christian, but very tolerant and open to the wisdom teachings, all these teachings that were flooding in. And this mix led to a whole new vision of what it meant to be human. And because of the Inquisition, which was always hovering over everything, the Hermetic path became alternate thinking and a stealth principle that grew throughout Europe, but it sought out and influenced many seats of power. It was really the dawning of a true new age. It created a whole new view of humanity, the Renaissance. It displaced the fatalistic view of the medieval church that your religion, your life is controlled, your destiny is in our hands. The whole concept of free will and exhilarating exploration of the infinite range of possibilities in life really energized this movement, the Renaissance, changed society forever. So the Renaissance emerged like a big bang out of the black hole of the Middle Ages, of the Dark Ages, which were defined by the powerlessness of the individual and stifling dissent. But any embrace of spiritual freedom from orthodoxy was snuffed out, and the plague was another punctuation of that time. It's no wonder that that period of time was characterized by the Grim Reaper. That's when that concept developed. Renaissance humanism, on the other hand, and embracing the magic and wonder of the human spirit, really defied the medieval devaluation of life. And the Renaissance transformed every aspect of society. So the question that I ask, will this ever arise again? Will history repeat itself? Can it repeat itself? I and many others have always said we do need a new Renaissance. Who will step up to basically reshape the established order? Well, it happened here in the United States. This is something, again, that most Americans know nothing about how our nation was established, the origins of democracy in America. The mind is made straight, thy head is now calm, the 7 crooks have been taken from thy body, now thou too hast a new mind. Degas Nawida, who was the great peacemaker, an amazing, amazing man who wrote a treaty, created a treaty that transformed all of planet Earth. Degas Nawida, the great peacemaker, was a member of the Huron tribe in Ontario, Canada. He lived in the 1400s. And his spiritual odyssey and profound vision created one of the greatest social transformations in history and impacted the entire world. His vision paved the way for the foundational principles of American democracy and one of the most amazing spiritual events in the history of mankind. He was born to a virgin teenager, growing up to be a very handsome, special young man, but he had a problem. He had a lisp. He barely talk. He was unable to communicate anything, but he was inspired by a grand vision that he was laughed at. Oh, you can't talk. He was ignored. They laughed at him. They were the ramblings of some crazy, silly little boy that could barely talk. This vision that came to him came in the forest where he had gone to seek refuge from all the warring tribes surrounding him and the whole region of that part of the world. And on this vision quest, he saw a great white pine tree with all of humanity protected under the branches. And a hole opened up in the ground around the trunk where all weapons of war were buried. And the roots of this tree went out in all 4 directions. And all of the warring tribes came and they placed all of their weapons in the actual base of the tree. And that's this phrase we've all heard, bury the hatchet. That's where it came from. All hostilities would end. Manly Hall in The Secret History of America spoke about how trees play an important part in the symbolism of the most ancient races, the Kabbalistic trees that grew in the Garden of Eden, the celebrated cedars of Lebanon, the tree of Revelation that grew 12 manner of fruit. The Quran describes the mystical tree Ababal, the father tree that sends out new leaves and branches each time a phoenix is reborn, the world of the Norsemen, supported by the branches of the great tree Yggdrasil. It's only natural, therefore, that this symbol of generation, growth, organization, and the power of heroes, so deeply rooted in the human subconscious, should find its way into the cosmology and sociology of the American Indian. It had four symbolic roots. This is Barbara Graymond, who wrote about the Iroquois, spreading northeast, south, and west. If any other nation wanted to join the League, it would have to follow the white roots of peace to the source and take shelter beneath the tree. So no one paid any attention to him. He was 18 years old. He said, well, I'm going to hop in a canoe and paddle. The Great Spirit will guide me. Said goodbye to his family. And off he took to spread this vision. He was compelled to take it to the rest of the world. He had a great commitment. He felt the Great Spirit was with him. He landed in upstate New York, land of the Mohawk, the Onondaga, the Oneida, the Cayuga, the Seneca, the Mohawks. These tribes were all killing each other, just endless warfare, endless bloodshed. And to suggest to them to lay down their arms and find peace among one another would be laughable. No one in the world ever thought that peace would be possible between these warring tribes. Well, he had a great fortune and met Jigonsase, the mother, the goddess of the forest, as she was called. She was blind to everyone. She saw everyone equally and was really the foundation of our concept of blind justice, which is the symbol of our justice in America. When he shared his vision of peace with her, she saw the power of it and said, I will support you. He referred to her as the mother of nations. Jacob Needleman is an American writer on religion and the Iroquoians, wrote, through the mediation of a woman, the mission of peace takes form in the world. In addition, it's woman's power of judgment that will ultimately determine the leadership of the Iroquois Confederacy, because the great peacemaker gave women the power to choose the chiefs who would represent their people at council. Manly Hall in The Secret History of America wrote, the social structure of the Iroquois was matriarchal. All lands and houses belonged safely to the women. The chiefs were selected, elected, and maintained in office only with the consent of matrons of the group. Although they had such an important place in political life of their tribes, there's no record that the women ever attempted to exploit their authority or usurp the prerogatives of the men. Imagine that. Deganewa was instructed to go into the heart of darkness. Here we have Campbell's hero's journey, don't we? Go into the heart of darkness and you'll find guidance, you'll find strength. And he found Hiawatha, who was a former Onondaga chief whose wife and children were killed by a rival chief. He was overtaken by grief and became a cannibal and killed everyone that came near him, eating hearts and flesh of enemy warriors. He was a horrific, horrific spectacle. But it was up to the Ganaweda to find Hiawatha and still within him a different vision. He found him, climbed to the roof of his home, looked down into a pot where Hiawatha saw his face, was transformed, asked him to come down. The two of them spoke. They found strength in one another. And Hiawatha, it turns out, was a magnificent orator. He was the man who could speak. He was the man who could articulate. He was the charismatic, brilliant one who could orate and extend the verbal communication of this amazing breadth and depth of this vision. The two of them would now bring peace to the tribes of the region. They first went to the Mohawks, and the Mohawks said, okay, this sounds good. We'll buy into this, but the Genowide, you need to jump into a tree, climb the tree, and we're going to chop down the tree and throw it into the waterfall. If you live, we'll buy into your vision. Well, he did it, and yes, he survived. So the Mohawk were convinced, and they were the first tribe to embrace this great peace. And now they set about to speak to all the other tribes, where they sang the peace song. They straightened the snakes of evil and the hair of the evil chiefs of the region, and this peace took hold. This great law of peace inspired Enlightenment age thinkers. It was a real world proof point to the concept. Remember, Locke, Rousseau, all of the Enlightenment thinkers believing in the inherent goodness, the altruism of man. Franklin, Jefferson, Paine saw how the Iroquois success could be replicated. Thomas Paine wrote, to understand what the state of society ought to be, it's necessary to have an idea of the natural state of man, such as it is this day among the Indians of North America. So the United States in this period, the late 18th century, was a remarkable breeding ground for Enlightenment thinking. And Europe, still constrained by monarchies and imperial autocratic authoritarian rule, the desire for a society free of all that inspired our founders to look at the natives, manly rights, and the mystical philosophy of the Five Nations. The League was not just a political structure, it was a living creature conjured into existence by the spiritual will of the people. The League was a spirit, and no matter how far a tribesman might journey from his home, how wild and strange the land, the spirit of the code was beside him, within him, guiding his conduct. If the code of righteousness is firmly established in the thoughts of men, justice will not fail in the world. Few Americans, or anyone in democracies around the world, realize how much of a debt we have to the Iroquois nation and the great law of peace. Yes, Greece gave us democracy. Ancient Athens gave us the idea of one man, one vote. We have the Essene mysteries that inspired much of that. But many scholars agree that the Iroquois gave us our federal system, the alliance of free states, balance of powers, sense of personal privacy and liberty. All of these were Iroquoian concepts. Benjamin Franklin wrote, it would be a strange thing if these 6 nations of ignorant savages, I'll forgive him that phrase, should be capable of forming a scheme for such a union and be able to execute it in such a manner as that has subsisted ages and appeared indissoluble, and yet that a like union should be impractical for 10 or a dozen English colonies. He's basically saying, well, if they can do it, my goodness gracious, we can too. The Iroquoian phrase, we the people, to form a union to establish peace, equity, and order, was Iroquoian, an agreement of 1520. John Rutledge, who is the chairman of the Constitutional Convention, began drafting our Constitution, opening with words from the Iroquois. The principles of their confederation were written into everything that we know about democracy. Leaders had to have the assent of the governed. Leaders were to be the servants of the people, not the rulers. Every region had to govern themselves, but they were federated with others for strength. Women had the right to participate in government equally with men. Well, we'll put a hold on that until 1918. But anyway, we adopted their principles. So there was a synthesis here in America where the revolutionaries, John Adams and George Washington, they invited the Iroquois to the Constitutional Convention, and the chiefs of all the Iroquois tribes actually addressed the Constitutional Convention in the First Continental Congress. I'm not sure how many in this talk read about this when you heard about American history and how our society, our government was founded. They basically said at the Continental Congress, if you observe our methods of government, you will form a union that will have branches like the great tree through all directions. It will flourish and reach to heaven if you observe our methods of government. And of course, we did. It was written directly into our Constitution. We owe a great debt to the Iroquois, to their tribes, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, separation of powers of government. The only difference is the Iroquois included women and non-whites, but it took us a while to catch up, but we did eventually. It was the Iroquois who liberated the American people. Once again, we have these astonishing phrases, sentences from Carl Jung. North Americans have maintained the European level with the strictest possible Puritanism, yet they could not prevent the souls of their Indian neighbors from becoming theirs. Ladies and gentlemen, the native soul is in our soul, in the American soul, and it's got to be taught more. We've got to understand this. So this final little section of the talk tonight, the intersection of spirituality and politics, it's my belief it's an evolutionary imperative. Gus Spieth, who's a very, very prominent advisor on climate change to the last 4 presidents, said, I used to think that top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address the problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation And we scientists don't know how to do that. Well, no kidding. So our journey tonight, we've taken an epic journey in this talk from the emergence of humanity, the dawn of civilization, the emerging of the sacred, the challenges facing our species, grappling with all these dual impulses of who we are, what we are. And we paid close attention to the Renaissance, an era that gave birth to this age of enlightenment, of humanist philosophy, setting the parameters for the modern age, for the Enlightenment. And it gave rise to the remarkable, the amazing, the origins of democracy in America. So I want to note that there have been countless other movements, events, deeply impactful manifestations of the human spirit seeking a platform in society, striving for this balance between our higher selves and the body politic. And I encourage all of you to do your own investigations into who these people were. And we have brief time here. I've just selected a very narrow few, but hopefully an impactful few little insights into those that did make this bond. It's no secret that integrating spirituality and politics is a great challenge. And it's got to be met with a great dedication and a sense of urgency by all of us. To me, I consider it an evolutionary imperative for the survival of our species. This last part of the talk, we're going to focus on modern figures, some of whom you're certainly familiar with and others maybe not. People on the front lines doing their best for change. Of course, how can we not talk about Mahatma Gandhi, the great one? He was a humble guy, a very successful, wealthy lawyer. Most people don't know that he was a colonial lawyer in South Africa. He became a Mahatma, a great soul, leading probably one of the most transformative movements in human history. His passive nonviolent resistance to the British Empire was absolutely epic. And many people, many historians have said he's the only person since Buddha who've attained self-transformation by virtue of the embrace of a rich inner life, satyagraha, the force of the soul, something that was the core of his spiritual journey, often a lonely one, but one that he obviously embraced with great gusto. In 1893, he was in the first-class cabin of a train, and a white traveler looked at him and said, "What are you doing here? Get the hell off the train." And Gandhi said, "No, I bought this ticket. I deserve to sit here." And they threw him off the train. So he said, "Well, wait a minute, that's not right." So he formed the Natal Indian Congress in 1894, and that thus began his journey into nonviolence. Violence, he said, is a concession to human weakness. Satyagraha is an obligation. He believed that those that embraced it had to tolerate injustice and demonstrate that whatever suffering come their way, there can't be any place for cowardice. It takes bold ones to stood up to it. Fighting back with violence would be a failure. You cannot seek revenge. You cannot wish to punish your opponent. There are always good and bad people, but you have to invite suffering and accept it to move the heart of your opponent, which he did, traveling through India, meeting everyone, fighting poverty, went on to negotiate for the independence of India in 1947. When he was 78 years old, he was assassinated by a fanatical opponent in 1948. Martin Luther King had a picture of Gandhi in every office that he had. And King, very similar. It's quite interesting. I never knew this. That King, as a very young man, was traveling on a long bus journey as a young man with his teacher. And the bus driver said, "Get up. You can't have those seats. The white folks need to sit down." And Martin Luther King said no. But his teacher said, "No, come on, we have to respect the law. Get up." And they stood up. He stood up for 90 minutes. And I think his legs got tired. He said, "You know what? The same way Gandhi did not appreciate getting thrown off the train, Martin Luther King said, "My legs are tired. I'm going to fight this." And he was deeply influenced. Began studying Gandhi, everything possible. He at Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania, he began his struggle for civil liberties, and his weapon was faith in God and nonviolence, inspired by Gandhi. That inspiration, which of course we've seen in our recapitulation and looking back at the history of the nonviolent resistance to the beatings and the dogs attacking demonstrators and the bombing, all of the violence was met with Christian love. King saw firsthand that nonviolence protest drew the attention with this Gandhian nonviolent resistance, and it was the guiding light of nonviolence that was his North Star. He referred to it as his North Star, his way of life, to create the understanding with the rest of the population of how change could be made. The coexistence of spirituality and politics could not be more brilliantly demonstrated by what Gandhi and King did. They were religious, yes, but they were deeply spiritual as well. They were inclusive. They embraced many, many different philosophies as they move forth in their task. Again, Martin Luther King, when he accepted his Nobel Prize, Peace Prize in 1964, nonviolence is a weapon unique in history, cutting without wounding and ennobling the man who wields it. Again, I'd love right now to ask for a show of hands, which I can't do, of anyone who's heard of Henry Wallace. And I would be surprised if one or two hands out of all those listening have heard of this man, who, by the way, was FDR's vice president and a mystic, a theosophist, almost became president of the United States. That's true. That's historical fact. In fact, this Time magazine article dated 1948, November 5th, the caption, which you cannot read, says, Henry Wallace, a liberal or a lollipop? Kind of tells you the skepticism that meets many of us, many of those who are speaking in a political context about spirituality. But let's look at Wallace. He was a towering figure. He was the vice president of FDR's first vice president. Why do we not know about him? He was a mystic. He was born in Iowa in 1888. His dad was Secretary of Agriculture. So it was natural. He's going to study agriculture. He graduated from the University of Iowa, and he said, let me go to Europe and see how the Europeans grow food. Well, he was traveling Europe. He ran into theosophists. He ran into Gnostics. He ran into astrologers, those who practiced Rosicrucian philosophies. The Grail legend took him over, and he formed a love association with that concept and how spirituality could have an impact on farming, on politics. People that knew him, and his biographers spoke how Henry Wallace wanted to create a unified field theory, Einstein's concept of how to unify spirituality and politics. That was his life's mission. So he created something called Wallace's Farmer magazine, and he was named first Secretary of Agriculture under FDR. And what he did was he implemented revolutionary farm programs, the Agriculture Adjustment Administration, the Soil Conservation Service, the Farm Credit Administration, federal crop insurance, food stamps, school lunch programs. This man, inspired by spiritual concepts, changed American politics. He confided in very few people, but he did write letters to a man he called his guru, Nicholas Roerich, who is someone that he referred to as his guru. One of his letters, Dear M, the search, whether it be for the lost word of masonry or the holy chalice of the potentialities of the age to come, is the one supremely worthwhile objective. All else is karmic duty. Here is life. Surely everyone is a potential Galahad, a Parzival, incurring the utmost peril insofar as his energy is in this search in terms of the other world. He spoke about the chalice. May we strive for the chalice with the flame above, encircled within the banner on either side. Yes, the joy of the Lord, won by striving and expressed in beauty. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Vice President of the United States, who would eventually almost become president, speaking in these terms, waxing eloquent about this eternal battle that we've been talking about tonight between the inner and the outer world. So his flourish, so may we strive for the chalice with the flame above it, encircled and with the banner on either side, indicates that this man at the core of the seat of power wanted only one thing, a resolute determination to achieve enlightenment, but to employ the gift of enlightenment in the service of humanity through public service. He was the youngest member of FDR's cabinet. Then he was named vice president. Everyone saw him as a shoo-in to be the successor to FDR. He created soil conservation, planting rotations, restriction on overproduction. He was referred to as the New Deal's Renaissance man. He was the administration's biggest supporter of civil rights. He convinced Roosevelt to put the eye in pyramid on the back of the Great Seal of the United States, and convinced FDR. That's, people often wonder, where did this come from? Well, Wallace considered the Latin maxim Novus Ordo Seclorum, the new order of the ages, to be translated as the New Deal of the ages, referring to political objectives in the FDR administration as the spiritual New Deal. Roosevelt, who was a Freemason, who was perfectly at home with all this language, was the New Deal president. In fact, FDR is considered to be the second most prominent and successful president in American history after Abraham Lincoln. So Roosevelt loved this idea of the all-seeing eye, a Masonic representation of the great architect of the universe. FDR personally approved this and supervised the placement of the eye in the back of the dollar bill. Unfortunately, there was this debate. Was he a philosopher or a mystic? Jim Farley, who was the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, said, hey, you know, this man is a mystic and that ain't going to fly in America. And FDR said, no, he's a philosopher. But they convinced FDR to drop him and replace him with Harry Truman, who became the successor to Roosevelt. And of course, history is what it is, and that's what happened. But recognize the extent to which someone at the seat of the highest power in the entire planet had these leanings, and it did impact life in the United States. Everyone on this call has been impacted by what Wallace did in helping to create what we see in America today. Everyone on this call was impacted by Native Americans and the Iroquois great vision of peace, the great law of peace. So when we look back at Gandhi, King, Wallace, these are just three men who dramatically altered history. They engaged all the levers of power. They made change, and it was derived by religious teachings, theological inspiration, Christianity, Hinduism, theosophy. So is religion a prerequisite for these kind of changes? Let's add, what is spirituality? Webster Dictionary defines spirituality as the quality of being concerned with the human spirit or the soul, as opposed to material or physical things. Well, let's take that at face value. At what point does a dedication to a spiritual life impact the material world? Well, Gandhi, King, and Wallace, and all the spiritual warriors throughout history will say they're intertwined. You can't separate those. And conversely, there are those who are on the spiritual path who refer to the material world as Maya, as illusion. It's irrelevant. And it pains me so much when I talk to people that say voting is worthless. Why be engaged? Forget about politics. Don't be engaged. That is very hurtful. So this is a fascinating and dynamic topic and a personal choice for many of us on every aspect of the spectrum here. So let's take a broader definition of spirituality as a connection to something bigger to oneself, allowing to experience life free of worry, fear, and uncertainty, this burning desire to have justice in life and the well-being of society. That definition can include achievements that were attained by giants of history, but it also can include many nations on earth that have no religion. They have no religious concept that has driven anything. So religion has nothing to do with many societies on earth. Religion can be the core impulse of societies, but again, in trying to draw out what is spirituality, there could be a different view. Let's look at Sweden. My first year as a graduate student and as a PhD candidate, my teaching fields were political theory and Scandinavian politics. My mother is Swedish. I had a Swedish heritage. I was always fascinated by Sweden. I landed at Arlanda Airport, was waiting to collect my luggage, and I looked over at the kiosk, the newspaper stand, and there was a huge headline. It was literally 50 font, gigantic headline, Skandal I tunnelbanan, meaning scandal in the subway. And in the back of my mind, oh, well, someone was stealing money, graft, overpayments, something related to what we would consider a scandal in the United States. I went back to my dorm, got checked in, went out, bought that paper, the Aftonbladet, one of the daily papers in Sweden, went back and read the paper, and I was stunned to find out that this front page news was the fact that they built a subway extension in the north part of Stockholm, and they failed to put in a handicap ramp. So That was a scandal in the society. So I thought, I think I'm in the right place. Sweden is considered by many to be a secular humanist nation. A lot of people call it godless. It is the least religious nation on earth. 8 out of 10 Swedes have no connection to religion at all. And yet it's considered to be one of the happiest nations on earth. Every year, the UN does these happiness reports. They cite Sweden. And by the way, that's created by the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. They use Gallup world data. And it's always these Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, Norway, that are always up there at the top. These countries very legendary for supporting a way of life to protect and support members of society, progressive values seen everywhere. Again, altruistic values dominating a nation. How about that? So this debate about the benefits and efficacy of social democracies, as a political scientist, that's a fascinating discussion. That's not why we're here tonight, to debate the relative merits of social democracy. But I do want to address this issue and bring up this concept. Can a nation be spiritual based on policies that meet this greater good criterion of a society? If altruism is the prime directive and that society is successful in providing basic needs, and higher goals of existence like inner peace, happiness, can any conclusions be reached about what's possible for humanity as a whole? I maintain that the answer to that is a resounding yes. How can the planetary community, how can the world at large engage in this discussion we're having tonight in a constructive manner, free of these assumptions? Remember, watch your assumptions that so often destroy our capacity to really change and evolve and engage these kind of discussions. Einstein very astutely noted that the splitting of the atom changed everything except man's mode of thinking. That's why we have to think about education. No question that educating our kids is so important. Yet, look at technology. What has technology done? Well, Waldorf education, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, created by Rudolf Steiner in 1919 in the ashes of World War I. He was asked by the owners of the Waldorf Astoria Company to create an educational system that could bring hope to their workers. Well, now there's 1,200 Waldorf schools, 2,000 kindergartens, 640 centers for special education in 75 countries. Unfortunately, not as extensive here in America as it should be or could be, but the whole idea of Waldorf is to awaken physical, behavioral, emotional, cognitive, spiritual, social aspects of people. That's so important. Steiner spoke about this, saying our highest endeavor must be to develop free human beings who are capable themselves to impart purpose and direction to their lives, the need for imagination, a sense of truth, and a feeling of responsibility. These three forces are the very core of education. So I don't want to ruffle any feathers here, but how many of us know people that all often extol the virtues of their 3-year-old being able to use a computer, being able to do the flashcards at age 2, this whole concept that Steiner would be horrified by, that basically is the fragmentation of this young soul entering into the world and learning to integrate as opposed to fragment, which so much of our education is about fragmentation and not integration. Steiner believed that all humans had the ability, inherent ability, to improve, to grow spiritually. So many things in this pedagogy of Waldorf is so incredible. So let's get practical here. Well, Mark, okay, Waldorf, it's elitist, it's expensive, it's only for those in upscale communities. It's just impossible to integrate. It'll never happen. Well, is it practical? Is there a way it could be replicated in the vast demographic of the United States with so many conflicts over education everywhere? Could the concepts that we're talking about in Sweden, the Swedish miracle, only 8 million people in Sweden, America, 330 million people, those ideas are just not practical. Well, it's my belief that we have to start asking, who among us have the moral courage of a King or a Gandhi to stand up to those saying, well, you know what, the way it is just is the way it is. Well, I'm saying, no, we have to go the distance and somehow make these changes. There has to be a different destiny. Ask these questions, not as an intellectual exercise, individually and collectively, but try to revisit the visions of our founding fathers. And by the way, our founding fathers were not seeing America as a Christian nation. They were deists. They were Masons. They had deep spiritual beliefs. They were not religious. None of them were. So many of these revelations about the spiritual destiny of America and all of these studies that we've touched on have to be reintroduced. I think it has to be to revisit what our DNA is. Jung spoke about it, that the soul of the native became the soul of America. But that soul is within us, and it's crying, and it's not being listened to. And look at this challenge. These 5 kids on a bench, they're having a conversation. This is kind of a cliche these days with, the black box conundrum. In the 50s and 60s, kids spent 5 to 10 hours a day outside catching butterflies and fireflies and tadpoles and climbing trees. What are we today? We're fortunately buried in the black box. Lao Tzu said, nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. Fascinating. Virtually all spiritual and philosophical traditions see nature as the ultimate teacher. Our understanding of and relationship to it has been diminished, and it's in danger of vanishing altogether. And I think that's dire consequences for humanity. In 1962, Rachel Carson published what started the environmental movement, Silent Spring, about DDT killing everything in nature. Arne Næss in 1972, a Norwegian philosophy professor, said there's an ego where the man is at the top of the chain and everything is beneath, whereas there's an ecological concept. He created deep ecology. William Wordsworth said, come forth into the light of things, let nature be your teacher. Deep ecology, I'd like to encourage all of you to Google it, find out the principles. They're quite phenomenal. They need to be reintegrated into who we are. We spoke about E.O. Wilson, the preeminent biologist. He's presented a grand solution for humanity. I love this, half Earth. He's proposing that we take half of physical planet Earth and turn it into a conservation easement. And it could be done. We're only occupying about 7 to 12% of the physical Earth. Let's dedicate half of it. Jeffrey Sachs, who is the director of the Earth Institute, said, quote, if humankind finds a way to live in peace together and in harmony with nature, E.O. Wilson will have played a unique role in that deliverance. So this is an amazing concept. Inner, outer. Are we mindful of garbage and stuff, or are we mindful? The physical is already illuminated with the presence of the sacred. If we care about the spirit, we cannot avoid concern with the here and now. The spiritual is about the social. The mystical is about the political. The cosmic in us has to be about both changing the human and changing the world of which we are a part. The healing inside and the healing of the world are wrapped up in one another. I probably could have just read this quote instead of talking for an hour from Omid Safi, Illuminated Courses, but I think that's a brilliant articulation of everything we've been talking about for the past hour. So kind of to wrap this up, from the dawn of civilization, where we saw that there was a matriarchal society inspired by the goddess, ruled for centuries. Hermetic mysticism infused into the body politic manifested a rebirth of humanity in the Renaissance. And then our nation, where a vision of a kid with a lisp in the forest elicited this amazing transformation and the creation of the United States based on equality, justice, shared values. The current century, where people with unspeakable courage, the Kings and the Gandhis, shaped our destiny and our history. So much of value that we see in the world today was created by these men and women of courage. And I think that we have to recall these moments and reflect on how important they are and do what we can, each of us, every single day to contribute however we can to breathe spirit into the commons. That's the world around us, our everyday lives. We have to encourage our leaders to do the same in every way possible. In conclusion, I hope this talk has provided some insight, hopefully, into that quest of seeking souls to reconcile the inner and the outer, hopefully to inspire you to embrace a level of activism that may have not been on your calendar, There's so much to be done. And as His Holiness the Dalai Lama often says, we need leaders of the world to be more mindful, selfless, kind, and compassionate. We need fewer supermen and women, fewer hedge fund managers, and more loving, compassionate, caring souls to engage the world. His Holiness, and I asked him once this question, and many people have asked, what is your religion? And you expect him to say a sect or a branch of Buddhism. His answer always, and it was just amazing to hear him say that my religion is compassion. And he has said compassion, that's the radical. You want to be a radical? Be compassionate. So everyone here, you're all very fortunate in that PRS is the greatest repository, I think, remaining yet on earth, with a rich array of wisdom, teachings, paths, and practices at your fingertips to explore at your will. And I want to thank all of you for participating tonight. And I wish all of you the very best in all of your respective journeys. All the best.